This film is based on the book Drugs as Weapons Against Us, the CIA's murderous targeting of SDS, Panthers, Hendrix, Lenin, Cobain, Tupac, and other activists, by John Potash. The story of how the CIA used drugs as weapons against us starts with European merchants making huge profits in opium sales. Opium is derived from poppy flowers and is the precursor for making opioid painkillers and heroin. The British East India Company, the world's first leader in opium profiteering, obtained its opium from poppy fields in an area of the British colonies along the Himalayan mountain range, between Afghanistan and Vietnam, the world's largest regions of poppy fields. A group of American opium shipping families partnered with the British East India Company to gain vast wealth and global dominance. The wealthy political families of the British East India Company influenced their country's participation in 2 opium wars with China from 1839 to 1860. When the new trend of opium smoking began to become a severe problem in China, its leadership tried to ban the importation of opium into China. In response, Britain fought 2 wars with China, eventually forcing China into a treaty relinquishing control of its ports and trade, as well as accepting the British opium imports. This resulted in a crippling, widespread epidemic of opium addiction in China. Britain subsequently gained cheap access to China's resources, gained control of the main Shanghai province inside what is called the Golden Triangle for opium crops, and separated Hong Kong from China. The BBC reported that Britain continued shipping opium into China well into the 1900s.
So this most bustling of British colonies was built on a drug which stupefies people. Even more remarkably, the British continued to ship opium into China until well into the 20th century.
In America, the Russell family rose to the top of all the opium shipping families in their work with the British East India Company in the 1700s. This Yale Standard article describes how they intermarried with other wealthy New England families, such as the Cabots and Pierponts. Tycoon John Pierpont, J.P. Morgan, descended from the latter family. This Harvard Business Library Company description details how the Russells became the top opium shipping family. These families put much wealth into the Ivy League colleges and formed secret societies such as Yale's Skull and Bones in 1833, who gave their members today's equivalent of $200,000 each upon graduation. New York Times #1 best-selling author James Bradley had previously written the book Flags of Our Fathers, which was made into a Clint Eastwood movie. He spoke about his 3rd book, The Imperial Cruise, at the Atlanta History Center. His research for that book uncovered how many of the Ivy League colleges were started by top opium traders.
Cabot House at Harvard, I discovered, that's opium money. You know the Skull and Bones Society at Yale? It was built by and is still supported today by the Russell Trust. The Russell family were the biggest opium dealers in China. If you are appointed the president of Columbia University tomorrow, it's the Low Library. That's dedicated to an opium dealer. The biggest initial benefactor to Princeton University was John Green. John Green was an opium dealer along with Warren Delano out there in Canton.
The wealthiest American families' power and influence led them to start 3 major programs for shaping society at home and abroad. They founded the eugenics movement, they started the Central Intelligence Agency, and they initiated Operation Mockingbird to gain vast influence over people's beliefs via control of the media. Chicago Tribune syndicated columnist Edwin Black documented the history of the genocidal eugenics program that deemed these ethnic groups, Irish, Italians, Jews, blacks, Asians, and Hispanics, as inferior and in need of sterilization, as well as elimination. After World War II, highest-level CIA whistleblower Victor Marchetti, a former assistant to the deputy director, said that the wealthiest white Anglo-Saxon Protestant families started the CIA and placed themselves at the top of the U.S. intelligence hierarchy. British magazine editor Francis Stoner Saunders also detailed the history of the CIA this way. C-SPAN covered Francis Stoner Saunders speaking at the National Archives about how the CIA spent vast amounts of money on foundations that funded virtually all of the well-known American artists and writers for at least several decades after its 1947 inception. She said they did this in an attempt to control the way Americans thought and acted.
The US government, through its intelligence and espionage arm, poured huge resources into a cultural propaganda campaign. A central feature of this campaign was to advance the claim that it didn't exist. The CIA was in effect acting as America's hidden Ministry of Culture. Whether they liked it or not, whether they knew it or not, there were few writers, poets, artists, historians, scientists or critics in post-war Europe, and indeed America, whose names were not in some way linked to this covert enterprise. A vital constituent of this effort was psychological warfare. The most effective kind of propaganda was defined as the kind where the subject moves in the direction you desire for reasons which he believes to be his own. It's useless to dispute these definitions. They are littered across government documents, the données of American post-war cultural diplomacy.
The eugenics-funding oligarchs led by the J.P. Morgan and Rockefeller families used their immense wealth and power to gain vast control over Americans' information in various ways. For example, Cal Berkeley Journalism School Dean Ben Bagdikian, in his book The Media Monopoly, detailed how the wealthiest families bought up a majority of the media organizations in the 19-teens before sharing media boards of directors with those in the top multinational corporations. Bagdikian found that increasing monopolization has reached the point of 6 corporations controlling over 90% of our information. Also, Watergate muckraker Carl Bernstein then published the findings of the U.S. Senate Church Committee in 1977 that showed how over 400 members of the media, mostly the ownership and management, lived dual lives in their work for the CIA. The Rockefeller and J.P. Morgan lawyer Allen Dulles headed the OSS and then became the CIA director when he helped save thousands of Nazis to do the oligarchy's bidding at home and abroad. Attorney John Loftus worked for the Justice Department in President Jimmy Carter's administration when he was assigned to research U.S. intelligence files on saving Nazis. Nazi scientists, doctors, and engineers were brought to the U.S. and put on the government payroll in a top-secret operation run by Joint Chiefs of Staff under the codename Paperclip. One of the CIA's top collaborative projects with Nazi scientists involved exploring how they could use drugs in warfare against leftist leaders in the U.S. and abroad. These projects evolved into the CIA's top program that it started in 1953, Project MK-Ultra, focusing on the use of LSD and other drugs in these applications. One of MK-Ultra's top sites was the same location where the oligarchs ran the eugenics program, Cold Spring Harbor. MK-Ultra scientists developed a psychedelic hit list of leftist leaders from Latin America to Africa. For example, they planned to target Cuba's Fidel Castro and Che Guevara, as well as Ghana independence leader Kwame Nkrumah, all of whom they planned to dose, meaning to involuntarily give LSD. Congressional hearings eventually exposed Project MK-Ultra running from 1953 to 1964, after researchers found that its name was changed to MK Search, which ran until at least 1973. The Congressional Committee gathered 16,000 documents on Project MK-Ultra and found that it included 149 sub-projects.
The hearing coincides with the release of 16,000 pages of declassified CIA documents about the agency's Project MK-Ultra, which ran from 1953 to 1964. It is from these documents and the findings of the subcommittee that investigators can piece together some of the projects that were part of the largest mind control program in the history of the United States.
The CIA's MK-Ultra program became an umbrella name for operations involving drugs and also hypnosis. This picture is from a documentary detailing how MK-Ultra scientists first offered incentives to over 1,000 soldiers at Edgewood Arsenal to try LSD and 24 other MK-Ultra drugs, listed here from one final report from 1955 to 1967. In another report on just LSD, when surveyed up to 19 years later, about a quarter of these test subjects stated still having lasting negative effects from LSD. Other experimental tests showed that LSD was contributing to mild cerebral damage and further mental health problems.
But the Army's own study revealed one disturbing and forgotten statistic. 24% of the volunteers re-examined had reported long-term adverse effects. Not physical, but psychological.
While this document shows the CIA was working on the use of LSD and other drugs for unconventional warfare, evidence supports that the battlefield would include whoever opposed their racist pro-war agenda, particularly Americans. MK-Ultra scientists then conducted what this U.S. Senate report said was projects involving the surreptitious administration of LSD to unwitting non-volunteer subjects at all social levels. One key reason may have been related to a CIA document statement of the developing goal of using LSD to develop means for the control of the activities and mental capacities of individuals, whether willing or not. Accumulating evidence suggests this would become the unstated achievement and the CIA's MK-Ultra agents' motivation for its ever-increasing distribution of LSD. Activist Paul Robeson Jr. has presented overwhelming evidence supporting that the CIA targeted his extraordinary father by placing a psychedelic drug in his drinks. Paul Robeson Sr. was an All-American football player in college. He graduated from Columbia University Law School and was a world-renowned singer and activist, and he eventually learned to speak 20 languages. Several weeks before a planned trip to meet with Cuban leaders Fidel Castro and Che Guevara in 1961, Paul Robeson had traveled to Moscow to sing and lecture. Americans in his hotel threw a surprise party in the room next to his and convinced him to attend. Paul Robeson Jr. described this incident to Amy Goodman on Democracy Now!, the radio program.
Wild party, all kinds of people wandering in and out, including dissidents, refuseniks, obviously anti-Soviet people, disturbed him very much. What happened was, he told me afterwards, a couple of days later when I saw him, he was in good condition, that he had hallucinated, not to give the details, but like you do on an LSD trip, then been terribly depressed.
What is BZ?
BZ is a special drug to produce extreme hallucination and then extreme depression developed by the CIA. LSD, it was developed on many campuses, you see, and the spin-off from the experiments, it was LSD, which is the weaker version of BZ. But the BZ was used on Frank Olson and on other victims to get rid of political enemies, foreign and domestic.
Robeson Sr. ended up in a hospital under the care of doctors who used MK-Ultra depatterning techniques. They gave Robeson 54 electroconvulsive shock treatments at overly high doses, permanently damaging his mind and sabotaging his career. The CIA appeared to expand its work to target the ever-increasing amount of leftist student activists across the U.S. American students had taken up Martin Luther King's civil rights movement with Freedom summer bus rides down south. Students also began organizing to oppose the increasing war in Vietnam. The CIA hid their work on the MKUltra program behind a group it secretly funded out of Cornell University called the Human Ecology Fund. That fund gave large financial grants to over 100 colleges, along with 100 prisons and hospitals around the country. The institutions conducted experiments offering money to test subjects for taking psychedelic mushrooms and LSD. Timothy Leary, seen here, gained the most notoriety from these CIA-funded college experiments. Timothy Leary used LSD and other psychedelics on paid student volunteers at Harvard from about 1960 to 1963, where he worked as a psychology professor. Harvard kicked Leary and his collaborating fellow professor Richard Alpert out of the university near the end of the 1963 school year. Leary ended up starting an international organization promoting LSD use. Two members of one of the world's wealthiest families stepped in to aid Leary's promotion and distribution of acid. William Mellon Hitchcock, seen right with Leary, and his sister Peggy Mellon Hitchcock put a massive amount of money into Leary's group. The Mellon Hitchcock family owned Mellon Bank and Gulf Oil, while also having members who were U.S. intelligence veterans. Leary housed his group in William Hitchcock's New York mansion on a 2,300-acre estate in Millbrook, New York, from late 1963 until late 1966.
We know we don't have the full story. We do, however, have some striking new revelations and insights. It was here that the first halting steps toward mind control began. The safe houses were not the only testing grounds. Millions of dollars would be spent on LSD research at universities throughout the country. And word would begin to spread on campus about this so-called mind-blowing drug. And suddenly, there was the counterculture of the 60s. Dr. Timothy Leary, the 1960s Johnny Appleseed of LSD.
The CIA funded and supported and encouraged hundreds of young psychiatrists to experiment with this drug.
In 1975, one of New York's top alternative newspaper publishers, East Village Other founder Walter Boart, interviewed Timothy Leary for Freedom magazine. Alex Constantine and the late Jim Keith both reprinted this interview. Leary admitted in 1975 that 80% of my movements, 80% of the decisions I made, were suggested to me by CIA people. I've known this for 10 years, and yes, I was a witting agent of the CIA. MKUltra scientists, doctors, and agents such as Dr. Humphrey Osmond and Captain Alfred Hubbard proceeded to set up shop at the Millbrook estate. They supplied Leary and his cohorts with many different experimental psychedelic drugs. Many of New York's influential leftist artists and entertainers were lured to Millbrook, or eventually convinced by the Leary type of propaganda to try acid. Evidence showed that the CIA and FBI opposed the Martin Luther King-led civil rights movement. These CIA scientist activities were diverting white New York City students, one of the largest sources of freedom riders, luring them to the Millbrook estate and damaging their minds. U.S. intelligence also opposed the leftist activists in the historically progressive San Francisco Bay Area. MKUltra targeted students enrolled at the University of California, Berkeley, who took part in civil rights and free speech work by promoting LSD parties. Nearby Stanford University had already been conducting MKUltra experiments funded by the CIA's front group, the Human Ecology Fund. Stanford University graduate writing student Ken Kesey accepted money to try acid as part of that study at a nearby Stanford-affiliated hospital. Within several weeks, the scientists curiously offered their experiment subject Kesey a job at the hospital and gave him keys to the LSD supply. Then they allowed Kesey to confiscate unlimited amounts of LSD. Kesey, a college wrestler who had barely ever been drunk before the experiment, held regular parties with alcohol, marijuana, and acid at his home in the Stanford area. Evidence would come out that this was similar to Leary's MK Ultra Millbrook estate parties. When the MK Ultra University experiments ended around 1963, an interesting romantic couple, Augustus Owsley Stanley III and Mary Cargill, stepped in to supply Ken Kesey with vast amounts of acid. This couple came from two of America's wealthiest families. Owsley Stanley's family was Kentucky blue blood. Owsley's father was a government lawyer, and his grandfather was a Kentucky governor and U.S. senator. A Kentucky county bears his family name. Cargill's family founded America's largest privately owned company. Owsley supplied Kesey and then California with unlimited acid. The super-wealthy Mellon Hitchcock family soon joined Owsley Stanley in trafficking acid nationwide. The Mellon Hitchcock-backed new organization, the Brotherhood of Eternal Love, helped make Owsley, seen here with the Grateful Dead's Jerry Garcia, America's largest acid supplier by around 1967. Chemist and engineer Tim Scully assisted Owsley. In the summer of 1964, Owsley, Kesey, and a group who called themselves the Merry Pranksters used a trip Kesey was making to New York as an excuse to start a cross-country promotional tour of acid. Arriving in New York City, they would end up riding through Harlem, New York in July of 1964, around the time of the largest civil rights riot to date. Was this a purposeful introduction of this neighborhood to acid? That the pranksters would later bring acid to Watts, Los Angeles in 1966 after blacks rioted against police brutality there suggests it was. Ken Kesey and the pranksters then returned to the San Francisco Bay Area and threw the first acid test party with the band The Warlocks. The party was held at prankster Ken Babb's 400-acre ranch. The acid test band The Warlocks soon changed their name to the Grateful Dead. Acid tests were parties with large amounts of Kool-Aid mixed with many hits of acid. Many people would be involuntarily dosed by each cup they drank. Ex-Marine officer Ken Babbs and former Army Commander Stuart Brand proceeded to organize a 3-night acid test that they called the Trips Festival. Thousands attended this event, and many were voluntarily and involuntarily introduced to acid there. One very important aspect of these acid tests came out of a reprinted legal deposition given by top CIA MK Ultra psychologist John Gittinger. In his book A Terrible Mistake, Hank Albarelli quoted Gittinger as saying that he and several other MK Ultra scientists had attended the Trips Festival and other acid tests. He said they tried to blend in unnoticed, unlike some other federal agents at one of the parties. This and other evidence strongly suggests that these scientists helped conceive and organize the acid tests. The fact that Ken Babbs and Stuart Brand held important military posts just before coming into the pranksters suggests they and others were undercover MK Ultra agents. Merry prankster Stuart Brand was interviewed by the media group Big Think and asked, which shaped you more, the military or the merry pranksters?
Which was more important between merry pranksterdom and U.S. infantry? They're about equal and matched in sort of bookends in a way, because I was at Fort Dix, and my weekends, I was running basic training as a second lieutenant there, and then my weekends were in the Lower East Side in New York, hanging out with artists, a group that later be called USCO, and messing with psychedelic drugs, and the week contrast was just the sort of life you want to have as a young man. I was in charge of a platoon, and 50 people, including some very experienced sergeants. One of the things I found with Merry Pranksters and the Ken Kesey group is that there were a number of ex-military people in that group. Kesey was not, but his number two, Ken Babbs, had been a helicopter pilot with Marines in Vietnam. And it's all a part of our grand demise. It's all a part of our grand demise.
While Kesey went down to Mexico to avoid possible jail time, Babs Brand and the remaining pranksters organized several more similarly large acid tests. It was then that they held their acid test in the Watts area of Los Angeles after one of the nation's largest ever race riots. Activists alternatively called these race rebellions as people protested and set fires in response to civil rights abuses and police brutality. A pattern appeared to become increasingly more distinct in the similarities between the pranksters' acid test and Timothy Leary's CIA MK-Ultra work against civil rights and anti-war activists. Pranksters introduced acid to college students from the activist hotbed of Cal Berkeley and San Jose State University, along with introducing acid to radical blacks from Harlem to Watts. Pranksters also participated in the first San Francisco anti-Vietnam War marches, urging people to stop protesting and instead to only turn their backs on the war. Meanwhile, the Vietnam War continued to expand. Professor Al McCoy's book, The Politics of Heroin, details U.S. intelligence's vast opium and heroin trafficking from Vietnam to the U.S. Some of the largest opium-producing poppy fields in the world grew in the Southeast Asian Golden Triangle area, bordering Vietnam. Heroin addiction and overdoses were sent soaring in the U.S., as shown in this chart. As this picture shows, heroin produced a huge boost in the American stock market as dirty profits from heroin sales were laundered through profit margins of banks and other stock corporations. Wall Street insider Catherine Austin Fitz described how this worked, as discussed more later.
The Golden Triangle in Southeast Asia grew directly out of our covert policies there. Before it had been run by French intelligence with the Corsican Mafia. We took over with our Air America and civil air transport planes, flying in arms to our allies, flying back out with the heroin. The first target being U.S. GIs during the Vietnam War, the second target being the United States itself.
Frontline's Judy Woodruff revealed a U.S. intelligence agent's report attesting to their bringing heroin into the U.S. during the Vietnam War.
In 1972, a U.S. intelligence agent in Southeast Asia sent a secret field report to Customs. The CIA was, in fact, facilitating the movement of opiates to the U.S. They steadfastly hid behind the shield of secrecy and said that all was done in the interest of national security. End quote.
The four top political icons of the 1960s, JFK, RFK, MLK, and Malcolm X, were actively trying to end the Vietnam War. President John F. Kennedy had an apparent political sea change while in office and ended up declaring an end to sending troops to Vietnam. He also tried to close down the CIA's Operation MK-Ultra, firing the CIA director and his assistant who helped run it.
Is there any speed up in the withdrawals from Vietnam?
Well, you know, when Secretary McNamara and General Taylor came back, they announced that we would expect to withdraw 1,000 men from South Vietnam before the end of the year. And there's been some reference to that by General Hawkins. If we're able to do that, that will be our schedule. I think the first.
A policy was put into place to end the U.S. involvement in Vietnam, and a formal presidential decision was taken in October of 1963 that would, if implemented, have caused a full pullout of U.S. forces from Vietnam by the end of 1965. And it's clear that he did. We have all of the documents involved in the making of the decision, including the decision itself, and including actually tapes of Kennedy ordering that decision to be taken.
President John Kennedy and his Attorney General brother Robert Kennedy also went after mafia bosses such as New Orleans drug trafficking kingpin Carlos Marcello. Numerous researchers, such as Professor Peter Dale Scott, argue that some of these factors led Marcello, the CIA, and the oligarchs to orchestrate the 1963 assassination of JFK.
He was the boss, the mafia boss of New Orleans. He controlled not only Louisiana, he controlled Mississippi, Alabama, and Texas, included Dallas. And his first mission is to go after the mafia.
At Dealey Plaza, there were 10 men arrested, and this has been kept secret for more than 4 years. Here are the pictures of 5 of them being arrested, and they've never been shown before. Several of these men arrested have been connected by our office with a Central Intelligence Agency of the United States government. I am trying to tell you that there is no question as a result of our investigation that an element of the Central Intelligence Agency of our country killed John Kennedy, and that the present administration is concealing the facts. There is no question about it at all.
2 years later, gunmen assassinated the first black activist to speak out against the Vietnam War, Muslim leader Malcolm X. On April 3, 1968, exactly 1 year after publicly pronouncing his opposition to the Vietnam War, a gunman assassinated Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Researchers such as King's friend and attorney William Pepper say that U.S. intelligence assassinated MLK, partly due to his anti-war pronouncement and partly due to his refocusing on economic issues. In June of 1968, Senator Robert F. Kennedy won the decisive California presidential primary, marking the likelihood of his winning the Democratic nomination and then gaining the presidency. RFK often touted his growing anti-Vietnam War stance before his assassination the night of winning that California presidential primary. Accused assassin Sirhan Sirhan was grabbed while firing a gun after getting no closer than 2 feet in front of RFK. The coroner conducting the autopsy on RFK held a press conference showing how RFK's fatal wounds came from behind the senator, within an inch of his head.
Dr. Noguchi, were you able to determine how far the gun muzzle was from Senator Kennedy's head?
One gunshot wound was found behind the right ear. We came to conclusion that the muzzle distance would be a 1 inch from the right ear.
Now, how far was Sirhan from Senator Kennedy at the time?
I would say approximately from 3 to 6 feet.
Where was this guard who was firing his gun?
He was standing directly to the side and back of Kennedy.
Before these last 2 assassinations, the CIA apparently began cultivating a massive amount of acid dealing and promotion. For his widely praised book, Acid Dreams, Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, FAIR, co-founder Martin Lee interviewed several undercover agents who reported working in the Haight-Ashbury neighborhood of San Francisco, who described the Haight as a human guinea pig farm. Lee also quoted a source working with the Hudson Institute strategist Herman Kahn, who collaborated with the CIA's MK-Ultra program. He said that Kahn was primarily interested in social control, when Kahn marveled at his own work at creating a similar wasteland in New York City's East Village neighborhood. Kahn predicted an alternative dropped-out country within the United States. This coincided with CIA asset Timothy Leary's mantra, repeated by both alternative and mainstream media worldwide.
Turn on, tune in, and drop out.
One possible way U.S. intelligence increased the trend of idealistic young people tripping on acid and possibly damaging their minds was to start be-ins. The first human be-in was organized in the same San Francisco area as the ever-larger acid test that turned into the Trips Festival. Researchers Martin Lee and Bruce Schlein said that many of the 25,000 people at the first human be-in were tripping on acid. U.S. intelligence appeared to put an ever-increasing stock into getting rock musicians to directly or inadvertently promote drugs for them. Ernest Hemingway's longtime close friend and editor, A.E. Hotchner, wrote an important book, Blown Away, an oral history of the Rolling Stones rock band. That book included Hotchner saying that in the mid-1960s, the CIA MK-Ultra deputy director Robert Lashbrook directed undercover agents to give LSD to British musicians in London. London undercover agent Steve Abrams stated that the CIA released acid to rock groups and that CIA agents were scrutiny to the 1965 incident where the Beatles guitarist George Harrison's dentist, John Riley, invited John Lennon, his wife Cynthia, Harrison, and his girlfriend Pattie Boyd over for dinner. Pattie Boyd and Cynthia Harrison described the scene in detail, and the Beatles agreed about what happened. Riley and his girlfriend proceeded to put LSD in the coffee Lennon and Harrison drank, without their knowledge. When Lennon found out, he was furious. LSD was so new in London, Harrison didn't even know what it was. Was Dr. Riley linked to the CIA's MKUltra program or the collaborating British Tavistock program?
How did you first get involved with LSD?
A dentist in London laid it on George, me, and our wives without telling us at a dinner party at his house. He was a friend of George's.
Cynthia and Pattie and myself were having dinner at this guy's house. Lysergic acid diethylamide 25. I didn't really know what it was.
2 years later in England, a man dubbed the Acid King, David Schneiderman, pictured on the left here with Rolling Stones guitarist Keith Richards, convinced Rolling Stones lead singer Mick Jagger to try LSD for the first time. At a party in guitarist Keith Richards' home that year, Schneiderman convinced Jagger to try acid, and then police came and arrested Richards and Jagger on drug charges, without arresting Schneiderman, who had many drugs on him. It later came out in London's Daily Mail newspaper that Schneiderman worked undercover for both the FBI and British MI5. Others eventually got John Lennon and George Harrison to use acid again over the next 2 years, before Harrison disavowed acid in 1967. Why did Lennon and Harrison take acid again, along with the other Beatles, Ringo Starr and Paul McCartney? The answer might lie in the Laurel Canyon area of Los Angeles. The late author Dave McGowan wrote an extensive expose on the rise of Los Angeles's Laurel Canyon neighborhood. McGowan's evidence supports that U.S. intelligence orchestrated the rise of Laurel Canyon as the home for dozens of almost instant music stars. The canyon appeared to give rise to the hippie image itself. The U.S. Air Force already had vast personnel in Laurel Canyon with a highly prolific movie studio called Lookout Mountain Laboratory. It produced a staggering 19,000 classified movies and film projects with top actors, directors, and producers who all signed confidentiality oaths to not reveal the films at Lookout Mountain.
Lookout Mountain Laboratory was a top-secret U.S. Air Force installation nestled up in Laurel Canyon, the existence of which remained unknown until fairly recently. Even then it morphed into a film studio at some point and was said to be the world's most complete self-contained film studio.
Dave McGowan found that virtually all the Laurel Canyon musicians and most of the actors came from top military parents or military backgrounds. For example, this picture shows a clean-cut Jim Morrison with his father, who captained the naval ship that caused the Gulf of Tonkin incident, starting the Vietnam War. John Phillips came right from the military into musical stardom with the Mamas and the Papas. Some of these Laurel Canyon celebrities were also part of America's wealthiest families, such as David Crosby of the Van Cortlandt family, as well as a media-propagated dance instructor, Vito Policus, who was Barbara Rockefeller's cousin. Final key members of the scene were Charles Manson and his followers. Many women walked around naked at sex and drug parties that included top actors such as Peter Fonda and Jack Nicholson, luring the Beatles and countless other musicians to take acid and use other drugs for the first time or more. Vito Policus collaborated with prominent Laurel Canyon musicians in promoting drugs. The Beatles' Lennon said his and Harrison's second time taking acid was in Los Angeles at a party organized by top-selling musician David Crosby of the Byrds and Crosby, Stills and Nash, near the Laurel Canyon neighborhood. Paul offered a glimpse of why he tripped the first time when he said peer pressure was strong to take acid.
And the second time we had it in LA, which is different. Well, then we took it deliberately. And then, well, we just decided to take it again in California, yeah. And the three of us took it, Ringo, George and I think maybe Neil, and a couple of the Birds, you know, that, what's his name? The one in the Steels and Nash thing. You know the Birds? Yeah, BYRD? Yeah. Crosby and the other guy who used to be the leader. And Peter Fonda came.
So when acid came round, we'd heard that you're never the same. I was rather frightened by that prospect. Just what I need. So I delayed, you know, because of a lot of peer pressure.
The Beatles went on to promote acid through their albums and movies such as Magical Authorities continue to use the drug charges from the FBI's Schneiderman drug setup to control the increasingly outspoken anti-war Rolling Stones musicians. There were a number of leaders who believed acid was anti-revolutionary and in conflict with their anti-war and anti-racism work. Columbia University SDS and its leader Mark Rudd, seen here speaking to a student crowd, represented this opinion. Rudd led the Columbia University anti-war building takeover, the first event of its kind nationally. The Columbia SDS marched in and occupied the university's main buildings for many days to protest the Vietnam War and government's racist actions, inspiring similar SDS-involved college building takeovers nationwide. SDS then enlisted Mark Rudd to talk at schools around the country to raise money for SDS.
We have closed down 4 university buildings, 3 of which usually have classes. We've had mass meetings of 800 and 600 people respectively.
By 1969, the Students for a Democratic Society had grown to nearly 100,000 members. At one of their national conventions that year, a division arose between 2 factions in the group, including a first faction believed to be infiltrated by undercover agents that instigated the breakup of SDS. Bernardine Dohrn headed the second faction, after having been elected one of the SDS leaders that year. This was the culmination of Dohrn's good anti-Vietnam War and anti-racist organizing in the 1960s.
Since we've been finding out about the organization of SDS, we've always been quite willing to talk about
We'll talk about socialism anywhere, in the streets or in the Senate, anywhere, you know. I'm Mike Klonsky, National Secretary of SDS, and this is Bernardine Dohrn, Interorganizational Secretary.
Is there a communist faction making a big power play for SDS at this
time? Is there any communists back here?
As a law school student in Chicago, Dohrn also played a part at a Chicago be-in, while other SDS activists had also become increasingly more sympathetic to acid. She, Mark Rudd, and others seen here had formed a new political faction that they called the Weathermen. At that convention, Dohrn emotionally followed up on a fractional debate by leading a walkout of many SDS members from that convention, permanently splitting up the nation's largest anti-war organization. Whether Dohrn's use of acid played a distinct role in this event is uncertain. Youth International Party, or Yippies. By the summer of 1969, an offshoot group of New York's Yippies, the Crazies, had unsuccessfully tried to chide Columbia SDS leaders into taking acid. Undercover FBI agent George Demerly was a leader of the Crazies. Rudd and a number of other Columbia SDS members were active in the Weathermen faction. At one of their New York parties, the Crazies spiked the New York Weathermen's punch with acid. Once they got Mark Rudd and the New York members tripping, the Weathermen disavowed their stance against acid and ordered all New York Weathermen to take acid. The CIA's MK Ultra work infiltrating groups and pushing LSD would later come out in a U.S. Senate committee report. Some newspapers, such as the Washington Post, covered it ever so briefly before never seeming to mention it again. The Weathermen came from parts of former SDS chapters around the country, as well as from undercover FBI training bases, as some FBI agents infiltrated the group. Mark Rudd, Bernadine Dorn, and other Weatherman leaders started showing the effects of acid in the following months by acting very irrationally. They invaded high schools and held teachers, purportedly to liberate students. They bullied money and meals from people on planes. They got arrested in a days of rage rampage in Chicago. And at a December of 1969 national convention, they bragged about not reading any books in over a year and lauded the Charles Manson group for their gruesome murders of wealthy murders. By this time, the Weathermen had changed their name to the Weather Underground for feminist reasons, and they appeared to start sobering up a bit as they became a militant anti-war vanguard group. Anti-war activists had begun strategic bombings of institutions linked to the Vietnam War and racism in 1969. These activists planted dynamite with timing devices and then called the building managers to have them cleared before the bombs exploded. The Weather Underground's leadership cell risked and lost some lives participating in at least a couple dozen of these bombings from 1970 onwards. Compatriot groups conducted similar bombings, numbering in the thousands in 1970 alone. It should be kept in mind that this was in reaction to America's war in Vietnam, killing over 2 million people, including several 100,000 young Americans.
There were 3 early morning bomb blasts on the West Coast, 2 at military facilities and 1 at a courthouse. Bill Stout narrates.
Worst blast was at the Navy and Air Force ROTC building on the campus of the University of Washington. The 32nd bombing of the year in Seattle, really 2 bombings, 2 charges, which went off almost simultaneously shortly before 3 this morning. There were warning calls to the police, who got a janitor out of the building just before the explosions.
Across the nation, between January of last year and April of this year, a total of 4,330 bombings have been reported. In the state of California alone, the average is now 20 bombings a week. Occasionally, far-right extremists are responsible, but leftists and radicals are most often to blame.
The CIA had Timothy Leary capitalize on this radicalization of so many young people. Leary gave up the turn on, tune in, drop out. He instead declared unity with the radicals and told them all to live their lives dosed on acid, while further stating that radicals should be dosing others. The Mellon Hitchcock-funded Brotherhood of Eternal Love flew Leary to Algeria. There, the Black Panthers' National Minister of Information, Eldridge Cleaver, had set up a Panther in Exile chapter. Cleaver had escaped near assassination and further persecution by staying in Algeria with his wife, National Panther spokesperson Kathleen Cleaver. Several New York Panther leaders, amongst many other Panthers, had joined him there. In deference to his solidarity with the Weather Underground, Eldridge Cleaver first welcomed Leary. Here's Cleaver before he took a more militant stance against Leary.
Now, these people who are walking around seeking freedom and liberation through drugs, I think they are illusionary allies, that they're not really helping us.
Martin Lee reported how that quickly changed, and Cleaver soon put Leary under house arrest, due to Leary having brought 20,000 hits of acid to Cleaver's Panther encampment. Cleaver spoke of LSD as part of a drug-induced totalitarianism and sent a message to acid-crazed youth that their God is dead as his mind is blown by acid, in referring to Leary. The Brotherhood of Eternal Love and the CIA helped get Leary out of Cleaver's house arrest and back to the U.S. Once there, Leary told the FBI the names and locations of various New York Weather Underground members, and they were arrested.
Don't follow leaders, words which have proved prophetic after today's revelations that Timothy Leary, guru of 60s counterculture, collaborated with the FBI and named names in the underground movement. Leary, who died 3 years ago, was famous for preaching anti-establishment slogans like turn on, tune in, and drop out. He could have added inform.
By this time, a man named Ronald Stark worked with the Mellon Hitchcock's Brotherhood of Eternal Love. High-level British police detective Dick Lee found that Stark and his group produced and distributed hundreds of millions of LSD hits to the international masses. Stark helped set up acid laboratories on several continents. Italian police arrested Stark, but an Italian judge who tried to prosecute Stark on drug trafficking was murdered. The next judge released Stark due to numerous proofs that Ronald Stark was actually a CIA agent, working for the American Secret Services since 1960. An Italian parliamentary commission investigating Stark's drug trafficking operation also confirmed his work for U.S. intelligence.
Stark was the biggest source of underground acid at one time in the world. And he ends up being released from jail in Italy after a certain point under the most strange circumstances, where a judge says that Ronald Stark, the evidence shows, has been an agent of the U.S. Secret Services from the 1960s on. Therefore, we cannot keep him in jail.
Writer Martin Lee presented this information to many 1960s activists and artists. He reported that a surprising number of counterculture veterans endorsed the notion that the CIA disseminated street acid en masse so as to deflate the political potency of the youth rebellion. Famed writer and ex-heroin addict William Burroughs concluded how the CIA hurt young activists in emphasizing LSD makes people less competent. Also commenting about acid, former SDS President Carl Oglesby said, "If U.S. intelligence bodies collaborated in an effort to drug an entire generation of Americans, then the reason they did so was to disorient it, sedate it, and depoliticize it." Meanwhile, U.S. intelligence continued trying to use musicians to promote drugs. Rock star Janis Joplin's fiancé Michael Raymond had told another girlfriend that he worked for the FBI. The FBI also had a file on Joplin. Details of Raymond's career supported his FBI work. Raymond got Joplin hooked on amphetamines before she cut off the marriage plans when she found out he was already married. Joplin further announced on TV in 1970 that she was going to do several large, unprecedented concerts for peace, raising money for anti-war activists. This never happened, as she had developed a heroin habit, and as she was trying to stop, she unknowingly bought an unusually pure dose of heroin that killed her. Janis's sister Laura said that rumors persisted that the CIA had arranged for Janis's death.
Like there's a couple coming off in August, the 6th, I believe, and the 9th. The 6th in Philadelphia, in Shea Stadium, and the 9th in Philadelphia. Peace festivals that Peter Yarrow sort of throwing together there. A lot of groups are contributing their services, and they're going to give all the bread to peace candidates, you know. They've got some real straight people to administer it, so it isn't a ripoff, you know.
Another rock icon, Jimi Hendrix, also died in 1970. Both the American and British media had smeared Hendrix in describing him as a rampant drug user who died from choking on his own vomit after using heroin. Top biographer Shapiro and Glebik describe Hendrix as someone who wrote his best album, Are You Experienced, without any drug use. They say he first tried LSD after making the album and only tried heroin a couple of times, not liking it. Shapiro and Glebik also say Hendrix's manager, Mike Jeffrey, formerly worked for British intelligence as an MI6 agent, who inserted himself into Hendrix's life and controlled him. Details of Jeffrey's life support that he continued working undercover for MI6. The FBI was also involved and had Hendricks under constant surveillance. This was likely due to Hendricks's support of the Black Panthers in 1970, since the FBI targeted the Black Panthers with their counterintelligence program known as COINTELPRO.
And a program called COINTELPRO, which was a surveillance and assassination program, and it led to the murder of 28 Black Panthers, and they learned from those documents that Jimi Hendrix had been put on a security index established by the FBI to have him and everyone else on that index rounded up and placed in detainment camps in the account of a national emergency.
Various government files on activists have shown that the FBI's counterintelligence program targeting was joined by the CIA's Operation MH Chaos. Hendrix's fiancée, Monica Danneman, said Hendrix believed Jeffrey set up Hendrix's first drug bust for possession of marijuana. She said Hendrix then thought Jeffrey dosed Hendrix's drink with a large amount of acid, and Hendrix thought it hurt his guitar playing during an anti-war benefit. Danneman also said Hendrix became very radical politically and had stopped taking acid in 1969 after Martin Luther King's 1968 assassination. Hendrix started dedicating albums to the Black Panthers and planning political projects. Danneman further said Jeffrey threatened her life if she came out with her book on the guitar legend a year after Jimi Hendrix's death. She ultimately released the book about 25 years later. She died, purportedly of a suicide, within a year of that release. In 2011, a Hendrix roadie published a book saying that Mike Jeffrey admitted to him that he had Hendrix killed.
Mike Jeffrey is an interesting take. He begins working for the government in the National Service. He works into the military. He joins military intelligence, and at that point, his career enters an obscure phase. So there's little known about his activities with MI6, except to say that he was stationed in Egypt and he spoke Russian fluently. He actually confessed to a jazz producer by the name of Alan Douglas, who was a good friend of Jimi Hendrix, that he had something to do with the murder. He wasn't entirely clear about it, but it was clear to Alan Douglas that Michael Jeffrey was making a confession.
From the late 1960s onwards, another top musical icon, Beatles lead singer John Lennon, started getting much more political. For example, he participated in anti-war actions and supported Black Panther leaders. In reaction, U.S. intelligence increased their targeting of him. In the 1970s, John Lennon took about 5 years off from the public spotlight to raise his second son. By 1980, Lennon came out of his hiatus with 2 albums and an announced plan to lead a march of striking port workers. Mark David Chapman fatally shot Lennon that year. In 1989, British attorney and crime reporter Fenton Bresler published his 7-year investigation of Lennon's murder, titled Who Killed John Lennon? Bresler concluded that the CIA used MK-Ultra techniques involving psychohypnotic drugs and hypnosis to have Chapman murder Lennon.
Lennon told Paul Krasner, the editor of The Realist, if something happens to me, it wasn't an accident.
Here's what John's son, Sean Lennon, said about his dad's assassination in 1998. He was dangerous to the government. These pacifist revolutionaries are historically killed by the government, and anybody who thinks Mark David Chapman was just some crazy guy who killed my dad for his personal interests is insane, or hasn't thought about it clearly.
Veteran British music writer Phil Strongman came to the same conclusions as Bresler. He additionally found that a Cuban exile CIA asset, Jose Joaquin Sangenis Perdomo, gained work as the doorman at Lennon's apartment and aided in the murder. Bresler and Strongman's copious amounts of evidence exposed CIA training programs for local police departments. They also uncovered that an Atlanta police officer trained Chapman in shooting and provided him with deadly hollow-point bullets with which Chapman killed Lennon.
And we know the FBI had a 300-page file on Lennon. Much of it remains classified for national security reasons. The doorman at the Dakota that night was Jose Perdomo, a veteran of the CIA's botched Bay of Pigs invasion, a professional hitman who worked closely with convicted Watergate burglar Frank Sturgis on the CIA's payroll.
Power to the people, heard that before. Free Mumia Abu Jamal.
On a different domestic war front, U.S. intelligence used many tactics to accomplish their documented goal of neutralizing the Black Panthers, including murdering Los Angeles and Chicago Panther leaders. In murdering Chicago's Panther leader Fred Hampton, it came out in court that an undercover U.S. intelligence agent first drugged Hampton's drink before police shot an unconscious Hampton in his bed in a raid on his home.
The CIA had liaison projects with police forces all over the United States.
COINTELPRO was the code word for counterintelligence program, and it was a program that the FBI created in 1956 to go after the Communist Party with intentions of trying to neutralize the party, put it out of business.
In 1967, they start what became known as MH Chaos, a code word for illegal domestic operations within the United States.
You might murder a freedom fighter like Bobby Hutton, but you can't murder freedom fighting, and if you do, you come up with answers that don't answer, explanations that don't explain, you come up with conclusions that don't conclude.
Extraordinarily talented. 21 years old.
They always had local police departments do their dirty work, and they began to devise a scheme that culminated in his assassination while he was asleep, drugged by his security officer, who was also a police informant.
City police in Chicago murdered Fred Hampton.
In essence, was an assassination authorized by the FBI, or sanctioned by the FBI.
The FBI is considered an attempt to try to smash the Black Panther Party. They stopped actually attacking us. Didn't mean they didn't have no covert crap going on.
Infiltration of cocaine into the Black Panther Party, its leadership, Huey P. Newton being the main target.
And every once in a while I says, "Here, why are you snorting this cocaine? This ain't the thing."
I had clear impression that chemical warfare would be utilized against the Black Panther Party. We had taken a position in our rules against anyone shooting heroin and narcotics found would be immediately dismissed from the Black Panther Party because we essentially were anti-drug in our operations.
Evidence also supports that U.S. intelligence used undercover agents such as professed undercover agent infiltrator Earl Anthony and Elaine Brown to hook National Black Panther co-founder Huey Newton on cocaine. L.A. Panther leader Geronimo Gijaga Pratt and National Panther leader Kathleen Cleaver identified Elaine Brown as a U.S. intelligence agent who also admittedly had top CIA undercover agent Jay Kennedy as her lifelong advisor. Pulitzer Prize-winning MLK biographer Dave Garrow said Jay Kennedy was a CIA informant, as confirmed by CIA documents on Kennedy. Brown sued Cleaver and Pratt for libel, but the suit was dismissed.
MKUltra was what you might call a research program by the CIA to determine if psychotropic drugs, mind-altering drugs, might be used for intelligence purposes, either for chemical warfare or the neutralization of targets.
See, you have to remember, if you read some of the COINTELPRO documents, they had a psychological profile on Huey, on me, on Eldridge.
I had the distinct impression consistently from 1971 that Ms. Elaine Brown was a highly placed intelligence operative inside the Black Panther Party.
I think Elaine Brown came in through Earl Anthony, and she followed the same course of devious type of activities. So I'm saying all this to say that they got involved with people and caused a lot of problems, but we was aware of it. We just wasn't aware of the extent that the LAPD, the federal government with its COINTEL, the CIA, FBI, we wasn't aware to the extent that these people were involved.
She acknowledges in her own words in her book, Taste of Power, that in fact she had been educated, groomed, taught at the hands of a longtime Central Intelligence Agency operative, J. Richard Kennedy.
So many party members literally have told me they believe this, that this woman was connected some kind of way and got step by step, piece by piece, got Huey hooked over into some notion that he could get more money behind the scene if he step by step methodologically demised the Black Panther Party.
John Stockwell, former station chief of the CIA in Angola, he said, well, I want to say this to you very clear. The Huey P. Newton that people see today is a direct result of operations run by the Central Intelligence Agency to ensure that he would turn out the way that he is.
Huey P. Newton was never the same.
Got no more blood to give him, y'all. Let go of Mutulu Shakur.
One-time Harlem Panther leader Afeni Shakur had moved in with Mutulu Shakur in the 1970s after she gave birth to future rap icon Tupac Shakur in 1971, seen here. Mutulu obtained a degree in acupuncture and was one of the first people using it to treat drug addicts, as assistant director of Lincoln Detox in the Bronx. The city tried to close the clinic down in 1978 before someone killed its director, Richard Taft, and made the bizarre but seemingly symbolic move of inserting drugs under Taft's skin. They did a poor job with it as he died before the drugs could enter his bloodstream. Someone also used the same strategy to murder the clinic's lawyer, Stanley Cohen. Cohen had also been representing Black Panther Assata Shakur regarding a New Jersey shooting incident where Mutulu's brother, Black Liberation Army founder Zaid Shakur, was killed by police.
We went to interview Dr. Mutulu Shakur, who had cured thousands of drug addicts with the experimental treatment of acupuncture. We found him in an underground prison.
The Young Lords Party and the Black Panther Party wanted every municipal hospital that serviced the poor in New York to have an acupuncture experimental center inside of their drug program. And because we were the first, we became targets. 100 policemen came to the Bronx and arrested us and took us away from the center.
Activists linked to the Weather Underground, including Bernadine Dorn's sister Jennifer, and activists linked to the Puerto Rican version of the Panthers, the Young Lords, worked at Lincoln Detox. When New York City police actually blockaded Lincoln Detox, Mutulu Shakur and the rest of the staff were forced to work elsewhere. A group deemed the Multinational Task Force by some and the Revolutionary Armed Task Force by others decided to fund health care in the Bronx by expropriating money from banks. One of their armed robberies of a bank truck in 1981 led to the fatal shooting of a cop and a Brinks truck guard in Nyack, New York. A massive police sweep led to those caught at the scene, including Black Liberation Army members and Weather Underground members who were driving the getaway truck. Mutulu Shakur was falsely charged with masterminding the operation and went into hiding.
Power to the people, heard that before. Free Mumia Abu Jamal. Got no more blood to give. Hear me, y'all? Let go of Mutulu Shakur.
In 1986, after 5 years of being a fugitive, the acupuncturist and Republic of New Africa co-founder Mutulu Shakur was caught by the FBI. Shakur was not charged with direct involvement in the crime of bank robbery, but only conspiracy involvement in the crime, despite no physical evidence to support the claim. Mutulu was also charged with springing Assata Shakur from jail, after which she was granted political exile status in Cuba. Mutulu was convicted and sentenced to decades in prison where he remains, despite being scheduled for mandatory release in 2016. While Mutulu was in hiding in the early 1980s, his wife, Harlem Black Panther leader Afeni Shakur, struggled financially trying to raise her son Tupac and her daughter Sechuwa. A drug dealer, Kenneth Legg Saunders, entered Afeni's life and got her hooked on crack cocaine at this time.
I tried to forget all the pain, insane in the game. I tried to forget, trying to make a dollar bill out of some change.
Legg Saunders worked with Nicky Barnes, who was an assistant to one of the first black New York drug kingpins, Frank Matthews. Professor Clarence Lusane wrote that 9 people supplying drugs to Matthews had their drug importation charges dropped due to their CIA ties. The New York Times then called Matthews' successor, Nicky Barnes, Mr. Untouchable due to all his legal charges that were dismissed. This and other evidence supports that Saunders worked as part of a U.S. intelligence drug-dealing network that inserted him into Shakur's life to undermine her activist work. In the 1960s, Chicago gang leader Jose Cha-Cha Jimenez converted his Puerto Rican gang, the Young Lords, into activists. Jimenez was in recovery from a drug addiction. Jimenez shadowed Black Panther National co-founder Bobby Seale for a month to learn how to replicate some of the Panther programs for the Young Lords. Police began targeting the Young Lords, trying to frame them with drug possession charges. The Young Lords spread to many other cities, with the biggest chapter arising in New York.
The ghetto streets, everywhere is the same. I tried to forget all the ghetto beats, he's trying to make them a name.
In the 1970s, activists had helped end the Vietnam War, and U.S. intelligence shifted its attention from the Golden Triangle to other drug-producing regions, such as Latin America. The CIA had helped relocate thousands of Nazis after World War II. Some of the Nazi scientists brought to the U.S. continued their studies of psychedelic drugs as part of the MK Ultra program. Many more Nazis were resettled in Latin American countries, particularly Bolivia, Argentina, and Chile. These Nazis helped build alliances with the largest coca plant farmers down there and aided them in backing coups against leftist leaders to gain control of those countries. For example, in 1967, Bolivian-based genocidal Nazi Klaus Barbie helped the CIA murder Cuban revolutionary Che Guevara in Bolivia before leading a cocaine coup in that country by 1980.
American CIC decided to smuggle Barbie out of Europe to get rid of him, to hide him.
With the aid of American officials, Barbie is smuggled to Bolivia, where he lives comfortably for the next 30 years.
A German journalist, Herbert John, knew Klaus Altmann before he was exposed as Barbie.
When the Nazis arrived in South America, 50,000 after the war, they set up a network. They taught the police, the military, security forces, how to enrich themselves. And Barbie was the man in Bolivia, and he was just the right man because he loved that work.
The evidence against Barbie proved to be overwhelming. On July the 4th, 1987, he was sentenced to life imprisonment for his crimes against the French resistance and the Jews.
The CIA worked with 2 Nazi colonies inside the countries of Chile and Argentina to start Operation Condor. Chile's Nazi colony helped lead the coup against elected socialist president Salvador Allende. The New York Times noted how the Chilean Nazi colony's leader tortured leftists in aid of the coup leader, with London's Daily Guardian detailing Chile's dictatorship trafficking cocaine. That coup leader, Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet, ruled for decades, helping lead some 9 Latin American countries' military dictatorships to murder tens to hundreds of thousands of Latin American leftists, including targeted hits worldwide.
Let me bend your ear, give my friend, it's not a game. Many complicated matters, too many to name.
CIA Director George H.W. Bush helped orchestrate some of these operations in 1976. Around that time, the CIA also worked on developing new poppy fields in the Golden Crescent area, where Afghanistan borders Pakistan. U.S. intelligence paid tribal leader Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, to develop poppy fields and laboratories for the processing of opium, morphine, and heroin. The CIA also tried to manipulate the politics of Afghanistan, which bordered the Soviet Union. Afghanistan elected a socialist government, and the CIA paid the Muslim Brotherhood, who became the Mujahideen, to oppose the new government. Reporters Elizabeth Gold and Paul Fitzgerald were experts on Afghanistan for PBS and CBS News. Paul Jay of the Real News Network talked with these reporters about American policies to manipulate the Soviet Union, as well as U.S. intelligence's work with Pakistan's military intelligence on cross-border trafficking into Afghanistan.
The U.S. policy is to induce the Soviets into Afghanistan, or at least facilitate it. They certainly succeed. The whole Pakistan society starts to be transformed by these billions of dollars going, arms going this way and drugs coming this way back into Pakistan. Eventually the Russians leave. Tell us what happens next.
And in fact, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar and Amit Shah Massoud were two of the main people who caused the major destruction in Kabul. But this was all part of the buildup that eventually was presented by 1994 to 96 as an Afghan movement, but really was very much part of the ideological political process that the Pakistani ISI military had
together with the Saudis, I think should be added.
Oh, absolutely.
Together with the Saudis, but also the United States was very much behind it.
Associated Press and Newsweek reporter Robert Perry detailed how George Bush Sr. continued working on the CIA trafficking cocaine out of Latin American countries when he became vice president in 1980. Perry and Professor Peter Dale Scott detailed how in 1979, the Democratic Socialist Political Party, the FSLN, aka the Sandinistas, launched a revolution against the U.S. intelligence-backed Somoza family dictatorship. The Somoza family had ruthlessly ruled Nicaragua since 1936. While vice president under Ronald Reagan, George Bush headed the U.S. intelligence umbrella group, the National Security Council. In that position, Bush headed covert operations, directing Colonel Oliver North as he supervised cocaine trafficking with a counter-revolutionary army out of Honduras that sought to topple the Sandinistas. That army was called the Contras.
A lot of stubborn ass niggas unwilling to change. Every gangster got a thing, but not many can name. And living in the ghetto.
Senate hearings with the involvement of Senator John Kerry's committee revealed much of the Contra crack cocaine operations. Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Gary Webb wrote a series of front-page stories in the San Jose Mercury News that became the first viral internet articles. Their claims substantiated that the CIA and their assets trafficked cocaine into the U.S. Other evidence supported that the CIA had the further goal of subverting urban American communities with crack, particularly black communities. DEA agent whistleblower Mike Levine also reported evidence of CIA drug trafficking. Levine infiltrated top drug trafficking rings, but the CIA sabotaged his DEA operations and thwarted prosecution of the drug ring leaders. CBS's 60 Minutes covered one example regarding the CIA aiding Venezuela in the smuggling of a ton of cocaine into the U.S. in the early 1990s. They also highlighted Mike Levine's exposure of these CIA activities.
The head of the DEA at the time, Robert Bonner, said that a ton of pure cocaine worth hundreds of millions of dollars had been smuggled into the United States. And he blamed the CIA, saying the agency had joined the Venezuelan National Guard in drug smuggling.
If it was a question of supporting people who supported our economic and political philosophies in other parts of the world, and they happen to be drug dealers, as most of them are, we supported them and we protected them.
Blandón and Meneses were working for an army that was a wholly owned subsidiary of the CIA. They were meeting with CIA agents. Blandón, and this came out in court. I mean, Danilo Blandón is now a government witness.
In 1991, former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark, who had worked under President Johnson, said that he believes the government uses drugs to sedate and divide the masses. Certainly, drugs directed into black communities divided whites and blacks. Drug sales also led to gang wars over drug-selling turf. Gangs led particularly violent wars over crack sales from the 1980s onwards.
And living in the ghetto that could drive you insane while doing hardships that come along with the game.
CIA assets worked with a dealer named Freeway Ricky Ross and helped him set up a national network that grossed billions of dollars in selling crack. Street gangs gained more members, particularly in Ricky Ross's home area of Los Angeles. The Bloods and the Crips were the biggest street gangs in LA, and they notoriously fought each other over control of drug-dealing turf. Meanwhile, CIA whistleblower John Stockwell stated how his former co-workers told him they were now flying heroin from Afghanistan's Golden Crescent to America.
Without mention of the CIA program and the secret war, you do pick up articles about, the drug allocations around the world, and the Golden Crescent is now the largest source of heroin, apparently, in the world today, right in there where the CIA's been running this operation with its C-130s and C-123s, flying in with arms and flying out with the heroin.
U.S. intelligence's increase of opium cultivation in the Golden Crescent area appeared to lead to more promotion in the U.S. to make demand for heroin match their supply of it. Evidence supports that the CIA psychologically profiled rising musicians. Nirvana lead singer Kurt Cobain fit the bill to inadvertently help promote heroin. Cobain had a chronic stomach ailment, and he had stated in his diary having tried heroin a handful of times for pain relief from 1987 to 1991. In 1991, Nirvana had released their first major label album, and it had a meteoric rise up the Billboard sales charts. During that rise, Courtney Love entered Cobain's life, and according to at least two friends, influenced Kurt Cobain to use heroin daily with her. After she got pregnant with his kid early in their dating, he married her with a prenuptial agreement. In early April of 1994, an electrician found Kurt Cobain dead in his Seattle home. Within hours, police stated that Kurt Cobain had committed suicide by shooting himself with a shotgun. New York Times top-selling author Ian Halperin and award-winning filmmaker Max Wallace wrote 2 books presenting evidence that Courtney Love aided someone killing Cobain. Police whistleblowers said their supervisor told them not to investigate Cobain's death as anything but a suicide, despite evidence of foul play. For example, Cobain's purported suicide note appeared to have different handwriting at a place where the note had only sounded like a goodbye to fans because he was breaking up Nirvana. Other band members confirmed Cobain was doing this.
That suicide note is a pastiche of things that he had written before, I think, and of someone copying his handwriting.
A former police detective turned private detective, Tom Grant, had been hired by Courtney Love to investigate Cobain's purported disappearance. Yet Grant ended up finding evidence that Love aided in Cobain's murder. Grant's copious evidence includes someone using the credit card in Cobain's wallet after his death. Furthermore, the coroner found an amount of heroin in Cobain's system that would immediately incapacitate and kill even a severe addict.
I just think that it's a staged suicide is what I think. That's the bottom line.
Weck says there was enough heroin in Cobain's system to kill 5 people.
All of the drug paraphernalia was put back into his nice little cigar box. The needle was taken off the syringe, the tourniquet was taken off the arm, everything was placed back in the cigar box neatly, and then he proceeds to take a shotgun and kill himself. It's highly unlikely.
A docudrama soaked in bleach presented expert interviews on Cobain's death, supporting that Cobain was murdered. The film also presented police foul play, ranging from a 2 decades delay in developing all of the death scene photographs to allowing the destruction of possible crime scene evidence.
Well, the photographs haven't been developed, probably never will be. We don't develop photographs on suicides.
I have never heard of that. Every case I've been involved with, the crime scene photographs were developed.
The creators of the film Soaked in Bleach found that the Seattle police allowed Kurt Cobain's body to be cremated 6 days after being discovered. They waited 30 days to process the shotgun found at the scene for fingerprints. They gave Courtney Love the shotgun to have it melted down, and they allowed the greenhouse crime scene where Cobain was found dead to be torn down and destroyed. The film Soaked in Bleach then presented expert witnesses reporting their disbelief that Cobain used heroin and then shot himself.
No study that I know of has correlated the use of heroin with suicide.
I cannot think of a case in which I have had someone inject himself with a large amount of heroin and then proceed to kill himself. It just doesn't make sense.
Several more aspects of Cobain's death suggest U.S. intelligence murdered the radical leftist Kurt Cobain at a time when he was gaining sobriety. First, Cobain had found a medical cure to his severe stomach pain, for which he had previously used heroin. A blood test a month before he died proved he had no drugs in his system and had not been an active heroin addict.
How's your stomach? Did you find anything to...
That's gone.
Yeah?
Yeah. I finally have been prescribed the right stomach medicine after 6 years of being in constant pain. Finally, I haven't had a stomach problem for like over a year now.
Additionally, the only police detective to defy his supervisor's orders and spend over 200 hours looking for the source of the heroin, Detective Antonio Terry, became the first Seattle police officer murdered in 9 years. Detective Terry was able to convey that his assailants knew his route home from work and knew he was a police officer before he died from his wounds. And finally, Eldon El Duce Hoke, an acquaintance of Courtney Love, passed 2 polygraph tests on national TV, stating that Courtney Love had offered him $50,000 to blow her old man's head off.
You did some deal with Courtney, right?
Yeah. She offered me 50 grand to whack Kurt Cobain.
Yeah, but how were you going to whack him? Did she tell you how to do it?
Yep, blow his fucking head off.
So where were you going to find him to do it?
Well, up there, and she gave, mapped it out. I mean, up there in Bellevue, wherever they live, right outside Seattle. I know right where the house is. I know right what garden to pop him in. I just didn't think she was serious.
But did she tell you how she wanted you to pop him?
Yeah, she says, blow his fucking head off. I got the shotgun.
But she didn't say anything about
making
it
look like a suicide.
Well, yeah, but if you just blew his brains out like you said, it wouldn't look like suicide. It looked like you blew his brains out, right?
But I told Alan, my friend, who... I'll let the FBI catch him.
El Duce had passed a polygraph test.
Eldon Hoke died several days after the filming of these statements. Love's father, Hank Harrison, said the extremely wealthy parents of Love's mother, Linda Carroll, helped take his daughter away from him when she was about 5 years old, sending him into a depression. Harrison said that Courtney found him again when she was a young teenager trying to get out of a juvenile detention facility. She said her childhood therapist had sex with her and gave her psychohypnotic medications. After Hank Harrison got her out, he found that she had developed a drug addiction. Award-winning journalist Melissa Rossi documented how Harrison also said Courtney was prostituting herself as a teenager. For example, when Courtney stayed with Harrison in Dublin when she was 17 years old, Hank said she spent much of her time in Dublin hooking on the street. Rossi also reprinted the contents of a letter from Courtney to a boyfriend when she was about 20 years old, where Courtney said she prostituted herself, apparently to earn money to get back to the boyfriend, while working in a strip club in Taiwan. This was Courtney's second time working as a stripper in an Asian country, as Rossi noted how Courtney had previously worked at strip clubs for the Japanese mafia at about 15 years old. Several biographies have mentioned this. Rossi said that Courtney told friends she had been part of the white slave trade while stripping in Japan. Harrison said Courtney then visited him when he was doing research in Dublin, Ireland, when she had just turned 17. There she also met a new friend of Harrison's, Stephen O'Leary. Harrison said in his book, Love Kills, that O'Leary later admitted to being a CIA agent in a letter he wrote to Harrison on his deathbed. Harrison had said O'Leary died in the location and date verified in this obituary. Harrison further said that Steve O'Leary and his brother Kevin took Courtney to Liverpool, England. Courtney Love biographer Melissa Rossi noted that Love carried 1,000 hits of acid to Liverpool. Love distributed the acid at various music scenes. This duplicated MK Ultra operations of the 1960s. Love repeated these behaviors in Portland, Oregon, Los Angeles, and other music scenes.
Okay, and he was openly told you that he worked for the CIA.
Later, he didn't at that time, no, but it was obvious. But at the time, he did not verbally tell me that because he was under oath not to tell me, of course. But later on, after he retired, he told me and wrote me a letter, and I have the letter.
Kevin Leary.
Yes.
When you mentioned Kevin Leary, you said, oh, he was high up in the CIA. What was his duties in the CIA?
Well, he had superiority over his brother. My daughter came along. Steve took care of her for me and got her safely to London, where she was then wound up in Liverpool, hanging out with Adam Ant and Echo and the Bunnymen.
The question remains, did Courtney Love's relationship with the CIA continue up to the death of Kurt Cobain? Her legal immunity and other evidence suggests it did.
Raised in the ghetto off meager means, fight to survive, head packed full of dreams. And a mission was a mission which way.
Evidence supports that in 1996, U.S. intelligence manipulated and murdered another musical icon, entertainment megastar Tupac Amaru Shakur. Before his early death at the age of 25, Tupac had produced enough songs for over a dozen CDs, had 5 albums which topped the Billboard sales charts, and had starred in 6 films. Mainstream media censored much of Tupac's history. For example, at the age of 18, Tupac headed the New African Panthers, which tried to replicate his mother's Black Panthers, and was active in 8 cities. Given that U.S. intelligence whistleblowers said their programs continued under different names, it's clear Tupac would have been targeted as a leftist black leader.
Now, we're speaking with Brother Tupac Shakur, who was the national chairman of the New African Panthers. My name is Bomani Bakari. The program is indeed Round Midnight.
I believe that the New African Panthers are about serious freedom, really reaching out.
Along with his mother, Afeni, many other former Black Panthers, including Watani Tayehimba, mentored Tupac throughout his life. Tayehimba was a co-founding national security director of the New African People's Organization, NAPO, and became Tupac's business manager. NAPO's national chairman, Chokwe Lumumba, became Tupac's national lawyer. Between the time of Tupac's first and second solo CD release, Tupac and his imprisoned stepfather, Mutulu Shakur, devised their thug life plan for Tupac to develop a gangsta persona as part of a plan to appeal to gangs, then politicize them. This was part of Tupac's extended Panther family's work at getting the nation's largest warring gangs, the Bloods and the Crips, to call peace truces with each other and engage in leftist activism. The gang peace truces spread nationally, and Tupac directly aided them, helping bring together gang leaders at gang truce picnics. Tupac and Mutulu also developed a code of thug life to help decrease the damage gangs do to their communities. The Young Lords influenced New York's largest gangs, the Latin Kings, to drop drug dealing and become activists.
The code of thug life
is a revolutionary document. Go online and look at Tupac's Code of Thug Life. He began to broker the peace between these gangs. If gangs are allowed to flourish because they're doing the job of the oppressor and in terms of eliminating young black men, that's what neocolonialism is. I don't have to come in as the oppressor in my uniform, with my army, with my people who look different, and kill you and lock you up. What I can do is create a psychological climate of self-hatred. I can pour in the guns and pour in the drugs and step back and let you do it to yourselves. And nobody's seeing where it's really coming from. And so Fred Hampton got killed in Chicago for the same thing. He had taken the Young Lords, the toughest, best organized, largest street gang, Puerto Rican street gang in Chicago, and helped them become a revolutionary organization called the Young Lords Party.
Went to school on high waters, were crossing through gang borders, breakdancing on the block just to cop a few quarters.
Catherine Austin Fitts, a Wall Street insider who had also worked as Assistant Secretary of Housing under the first President George Bush, detailed how vastly street drugs prop up various corporate stocks. She evolved politically and tried to expose this, such as in this article in Narco News, in which she details how several street-level drug dealers each make at least several $100s a day, 250 days a year, equaling a net of at least $100,000 a year for their supplier. Fitts said this money is laundered by establishments dealing in cash. These include restaurants and banks who hide the cash in their accounting ledgers as money received legitimately, and then return the money to the higher-level dealers in a way that makes their money appear legally earned. Fitts said that these banks and restaurant chains on the stock exchange increase their stock values by 20 to 30 times and turn a $100,000 profit into a $2 to $3 million profit of stock value. Thus, the radicalization of the 3,000-member Latin Kings alone cost the money launderers billions of dollars.
One of the ways that we finance the growth of multinational corporations and big banks and the rise of the Dow Jones is by selling narcotics to our children. It's one of the most profitable businesses in America. And towards the end, we were discussing the fact that the Department of Justice estimates that the United States is the leader in laundering organized crime profits of about $500 billion to $1 trillion a year. So I asked the audience, what would happen if we stopped being the worldwide leader in laundering $500 billion to $1 trillion a year? And they said, well, you know, if we stopped, our mutual funds would go down in price, the stock market would crash.
President Bush, the former CIA director, had rallied massive federal forces against the gang truce movement, and researchers published evidence that police framed gang peace truce leaders, as this excerpt of Mike Davis's article in the New Left Review details. Congress had also formed a committee looking into the dangers of radical political rappers. The prison system transferred Mutulu Shakur into the country's most maximum security prison due to his influence through Tupac.
Life as I knew it was about the grind, while Pops was in the pen just doing his time.
Several attempts were made on Tupac's life, including 2 allegedly off-duty Atlanta police officers using a gun stolen from an evidence room to shoot at him. Much evidence supports that Haitian Jacques Aignant was an undercover police agent, including a long rap sheet of charges that were all dismissed. Aignant set up Tupac's sexual liaison with Ayanna Jackson, where she accused him of forced sex on her second sexual encounter with him. Police erased taped evidence helping exonerate Tupac. While Tupac was found not guilty of all major charges, a jury did find him guilty of touching her butt against her will after consensual sex. For that, a judge gave Tupac a sentence of up to 4 years in prison while awaiting appeal in December of 1994. U.S. intelligence appeared to take a greater role in manipulating Tupac during his 11 months in jail and 11 months out. First, they practiced penal coercion on him, which involved extreme psychological manipulation techniques. They coupled this with COINTELPRO tactics to instigate the East Coast versus West Coast rap war between Tupac and his rapper friend Biggie Smalls. And they coerced him to join the music label Death Row Records while still in jail.
Lady Justice is blind, can't see our pain. Ain't do a damn thing when my brother was slain.
Death Row had dozens of police officers working at all levels of their company, particularly Reggie Wright Jr., whose father, Reggie Wright Sr., headed the Compton area's police gang division. When investigating, police detective Russell Poole asked about the purpose of the police officers in Death Row Records. His superior said they could be considered covert agents. Police reports stated that Death Row trafficked drugs and guns, but were never charged. Death Row employees said Knight tried to end the gang peace truce, and evidence supports Death Row aided the murder of Tupac. Death Row also produced the most negative Tupac songs, which promoted weed and alcohol, while also exacerbating the East versus West rap war. Georgetown law professor Michelle Alexander wrote The New Jim Crow about how U.S. intelligence has contributed to the mass incarceration of blacks through long jail sentences for nonviolent drug offenses, such as marijuana possession. The following are excerpts from the award-winning filmmaker Nick Broomfield's movie Biggie and Tupac. Broomfield presented Detective Poole's press conference about his superiors blocking his investigation, as well as his beliefs that his fellow cops aided in Tupac and Biggie's murders. Detective Poole had presented reports on Death Row's drug trafficking. He also cited the police officers in Death Row, including its security director, former cop Reggie Wright Jr., whose father headed a police gang division.
I provided the chief with enough information and evidence that would warrant a full probe, and at that meeting I was ordered not to investigate any further.
Ex-Detective Poole resigned after 18 years on the force when he was prevented from investigating fellow police officers whom he believed to be involved in the murders of Biggie Smalls and Tupac Shakur.
Because it was no secret that Death Row Records was involved in drug trafficking.
Between 30 and 40 police officers, some of whom are seen here, worked off duty for Death Row. This is Reggie Wright Sr., Chief Gangs Officer. I'm dealing with this man, Reggie Jr., seen here second left, who's been running Death Row since Suge Knight's been in prison.
And how the hell it happened, man, I can't explain. So I'ma wipe away the kids, take over the game.
By the summer of 1996, Tupac said he fulfilled his Death Row Records contract and started his own record label, Euthanasia, with its logo seen here on his medallion. Tupac had further majorly decreased his drinking and weed smoking, as noted here by rap mogul Russell Simmons, and he got engaged to Quincy Jones's daughter, Kidada. A Death Row guard, Kevin Hackey, who was also working for the FBI, apparently turned on the FBI when he warned Tupac not to attend a Mike Tyson boxing match on September 7, 1996 in Las Vegas. Death Row fired Hackey immediately after they learned about the warning. Tupac went to Las Vegas and was shot in a drive-by incident after the fight. Hackey said he had documents to prove the FBI were in Tupac's motorcade and watched when a car pulled up to Tupac's in Las Vegas and fatally shot him. Filmmaker Broomfield reported on U.S. congressional concerns about radical political rap several years before Tupac's death, and on Hackey's statements that the FBI at least watched Tupac's murder.
In 1993, a Senate Select Committee was set up to look into the hip-hop movement. Fear of its inflammatory qualities led to FBI surveillance. Hackey just informed us he was working as an undercover FBI agent a year before Tupac was killed. According to Hackey, FBI agents and ATN agents were in cars just behind Tupac on the night he was shot.
Former New York Black Panther 21 trial target Jamal Joseph eventually became chairman of the Columbia University Film Department while staying close with Afeni and Tupac Shakur. Joseph described his belief that Suge Knight and others at Death Row influenced Tupac to start smoking weed again. They appeared to do this for U.S. intelligence to both manipulate Tupac and then take him down when he was leaving Death Row Records to become a more sober and positive leader.
He also talked about the fact that he was going to stop getting high. And I know that, when he got out, that when he got into the car on the way to the airport, Suge Knight was like, man, here, have a drink. Here's a blunt. Now, right away it's manipulation and a different agenda. And so I think that there are people, Suge Knight and other people, that took those things and just go like, okay, we don't want him thinking clearly. But yes, I think he was targeted because he was a Shakur, and because they know connected with that name was not just the legacy, but the activism and the ability to organize millions.
Starting around the mid-1990s, U.S. intelligence appeared to push another drug, MDMA or ecstasy. MDMA's precursor drug, MDA, had been used in the CIA's MK-Ultra experiments. Many studies conducted in various countries revealed that ecstasy led to memory loss, with even infrequent usage. The apartheid South African government appeared to use ecstasy as a weapon against its black citizens. The assistant to the head of South Africa's Chemical and Biological Warfare Program said his boss, Walter Basson, directed him to manufacture a ton of ecstasy. The post-apartheid government charged Basson with selling 1,000 hits of ecstasy in South African black neighborhoods. Investigators found that Basson's ecstasy trafficking went well beyond South Africa, as he collaborated with military chemical warfare centers in the U.S. and Britain.
In 1999, Basson was brought to trial for murder, fraud, and drug smuggling. Witnesses described the horrors committed by Project Coast. Investigators revealed how the program had used private front companies, offshore bank accounts, and worldwide intelligence connections.
You were able to visit Portendale, Fort Detrick?
Yes, we did that. I already have hassles with the UK and the American governments. I don't need any more, thank you.
Basson was confirming visits to the main bioweapons labs in the West.
The popular New York rap group Wu-Tang Clan, who were co-produced by black activist leader Sonny Carson, was also a target of a major U.S. intelligence operation involving the FBI and ATF. A high-level mafia ecstasy kingpin, Michael Caruso, was paid to go undercover inside Wu-Tang Clan. Caruso inserted himself into the rap group, becoming a personal manager for 2 of the group members. He treated them to parties with drugs and beautiful women. When the Village Voice ran a cover story exposing Caruso's mafia and U.S. intelligence connections, the Wu-Tang rappers immediately fired Caruso.
Everybody pays when you ain't ate for days. The curse of a slave and the hate you gave.
Besides appearing to spread ecstasy among the hip-hop generation in these and further ways, U.S. intelligence continued to wage war against other children of leading Black Panthers, who called themselves Panther Cubs. Chicago Panther leader Fred Hampton's son, Fred Hampton Jr., became head of the International People's Democratic Uhuru movement in 1990. He experienced at least several assassination attempts and was convicted of aggravated arson in what clearly appeared as a frame-up by police. After serving 9 years in prison, Hampton founded the Prisoners of Conscience Committee, POCC.
Introduce yourself. Tell us what's going on today, and what are your thoughts?
Chairman Fred Hampton Jr. of the Black Panther Party Cubs, son of Chairman Fred Hampton, as well as Akur and Jerry, formerly known as Deborah Johnson. In fact, she just went in just now. This is not police brutality. It's police terrorism. Let's be consistent with that. We got to organize and be very clear that there is a gang problem in this city, and the worst gang in this city is Chicago Police Department. You know what I'm saying? We got to be consistent with that. The police, in fact, former Superintendent of Chicago Police Leroy Martin himself said that the worst gang, the baddest gang in the city, Chicago Police Department. They plant drugs on you. They do drive-bys, the whole lick. We not gonna get sidetracked with the police calling. We very clear. Ain't no war on drugs, no war on guns, no war on gang. It's war on our black asses. Point blank.
By the new millennium, 2 new groups that received much attention bore a strong resemblance to and had many of the same links as the CIA MK-Ultra's Human Ecology Fund. Officials in the Pentagon aided the new organization, the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies, or MAPS, which had started in 1986. The similar Hefter group started near that time and did similar work with the help from the Rockefeller family. People associated with both MAPS and the Hefter Institute worked with William Leonard Picard, who, with longtime paid U.S. intelligence partner Gordon Todd Skinner, rose to become the top-known LSD trafficker by the new millennium. Picard manufactured 10 million hits a month in a decommissioned missile silo in Wamego, Kansas. Picard had previously met with the Brotherhood of Eternal Love's top scientist, Tim Scully, in 1974. William Picard had a dizzying array of connections to universities, top government officials, top military figures, and the British House of Lords. Picard regularly met with many MK-Ultra contractors as well as receiving payments, at one time, from the Drug Enforcement Agency in the 1980s. Picard had also manufactured MDMA, or ecstasy. In November of 2000, some apparently honest Drug Enforcement Agency officials arrested Picard for his acid trafficking. Most of Picard's powerful associates went unpunished for this acid trafficking, including his very wealthy U.S. intelligence agent partner Gordon Todd Skinner, as well as MAPS and Hefter-funded Harvard Medical School professor John Halpern, who admittedly gave Picard $299,000 in cash in 1998 with no explanation. The international drug wars continue today in various other ways. In 1991, President George H.W. Bush launched the Andean Initiative, allocating $4.5 billion purportedly to eradicate cocaine-producing coca crops in Colombia and other Latin American countries. President Bush called it an anti-drug campaign, but coca production tripled from the time he launched it in the 1980s to 2000. On September 11, 2001, planes flew into the World Trade Center and an attack also occurred at the Pentagon. President George W. Bush quickly blamed Osama bin Laden's al-Qaeda and linked them to Taliban-controlled Afghanistan. Less than 1 month later, on October 2, 2001, President Bush started the longest-running war in American history in Afghanistan. Since then, Afghanistan has become the largest opium-producing area in at least 60 years. Pictured here are American soldiers in an Afghanistan opium-producing poppy field. Professor Peter Dale Scott and other researchers report that Bush's real reason for attacking the Taliban in Afghanistan appeared to be the Taliban's eradication of their opium-producing poppy fields in 2000. In 1999, Afghanistan supplied 5,000 tons of heroin annually, or 70 to 75% of the world's heroin. In June of 2001, the New York Times and the Washington Post printed articles confirming that the Taliban's ban on opium production that year virtually wiped out 70% of the world's illicit opium production. The only people in Afghanistan that continued production were a small CIA-funded group called the Northern Alliance, who produced about 185 tons of opium during that ban. By 2007, after 6 years of the U.S. war on Afghanistan, opium production rose to over 8,000 tons, nearly doubling any previous production. A New York Times article discussed how the U.S. installed Northern Alliance leader Hamid Karzai as president, while his brother, Ahmed Karzai, had been on the CIA payroll for 8 years, and the White House believed Ahmed was involved in drug trafficking. In September of 2011, a group of activists that called themselves Occupy Wall Street protested in a park across from New York's Wall Street financial district. They started chanting the notion that most Americans are the 99% of the population from which the 1% wealthiest are stealing. The Occupy movement spread around the country, and U.S. intelligence began targeting them in various ways. In 2012, activist videographers released footage of their investigation of what they deemed MK Occupy Minnesota, with a clear reference to CIA's MK Ultra. They found that police intelligence bribed Minneapolis Occupy activists to smoke potent weed, along with the potentially psychosis-causing spice and K2. Then they interrogated these activists about other Occupy activists and offered them bribes to become police informants on the Occupy movement. The police officers involved were found to be part of a national drug recognition program active in 49 states and Canada. The program was at least stopped in Minnesota after the MK Occupy film spawned many more investigative disclosures. One of these disclosures cited by CBS News was that 190 officers at 85 Minnesota agencies are drug recognition trained officers.
Yeah, people doing K2, the spice, illegal stuff, that synthetic. They have people drinking and smoking.
We know who you are. We know that you're Panda and that you're deep into the Occupy movement. And it was like, dang, am I that infamous in the system? He would give me a quarter more of marijuana, and if I said I would become a reformer.
In the arena of opium and money laundering, Bloomberg News reported that by 2013, J.P. Morgan Chase was the largest bank in the world. John Pierpont Morgan was a descendant of the Pierpont family that had intermarried with the Russell family, the top American opium traders. In 2013, President Obama's administration fined J.P. Morgan Chase Bank over $2 billion for not safeguarding against money laundering and other illegal practices. Europe's largest bank, HSBC, had a record-breaking money laundering settlement with the Obama administration in 2013, yet was allowed to keep its enormous profits. No one went to jail. That year, HSBC was the world's third largest bank and sixth largest public company. HSBC stands for Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation, and a Scottish lord founded it in 1865 with the help of his opium trading profits.
Hong Kong grew at an astonishing rate. A new bank was founded to service the China trade, the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank. We know it as HSBC.
So, two of the three largest banks in the world gained their start from opium shipping money. As detailed earlier, evidence supports that America fought its two longest wars in the Golden Triangle area next to Vietnam, and at the other end of that Himalayan mountain range in the Golden Crescent of Afghanistan, starting in 2002, over opium. In October of 2017, Newsweek magazine reported that under President Trump administration orders, the U.S. military dropped more bombs on Afghanistan that September than dropped in any other month in the previous 7 years. Their drug wars continue, while more and more activists are rising up to stop them.
Power to the people, heard that before. Free Mumia Abu Jamal. Got no more blood to give him a let go of Mutulu Shakur.
Power to the people, heard that before. Free Mumia Abu Jamal. Got no more blood to give, hear me up. Keep your hands off us.
ghetto off league of means. Fighting to survive, head packed full of dreams. Ambition was a mission, which way to move. I'm tired of hearing my mama sobbing, crying the blues. Went to school on high waters, with crossing through gang borders.